Hey everybody, I wanted to talk a little bit about the topic of this video, or the title of this video, which is why literacy is the key to changing the world. I wanted to share an experience that I had with a student studying for the SAT that will explain, or give some context anyways, as to why this is such an important point. And I'll explain why. It may not be obvious at first, but okay. In this particular problem that we were looking at, the problem was very simple from a certain perspective. There was a can, and it was an aluminum can, and basically they gave you the height of the can, they gave you the area of the circular base of this can. It was a cylinder, this can. And they gave you the height and the area of the base. And then they also told you that the amount of liquid syrup that's used to fill the can with fruit inside, the syrup itself had a certain volume. And what they asked for was, what's the total volume of the fruit inside the can? Okay, so again, you have a cylindrical can. They give you the height of the can. They give you the area of the base of the can, which is a circle. And they tell you that the volume of the syrup that fills the can when there's fruit inside is a certain amount of volume. They tell you that volume. And they ask you to find the, quote, total volume of the fruit inside the can. It's actually a really simple problem. All you have to do is, well, first you have to understand what the problem's asking, but you have to basically find the total volume of the can itself, which means you just multiply the height and the base of the can, so you get a certain volume, and then you subtract from that the volume of the syrup that's in the can, because when you do that, you'll have the volume of the fruit in the can, because the volume of the fruit plus the volume of the syrup equals the total volume of the can, because it's totally filled up. And it was really interesting because when I was working with this, so basically I had a student who had come to me for help with this SAT, that they had taken a practice SAT, and they had a bunch of problems that they had missed, and they wanted my help with figuring out why they got certain problems wrong. And so it always comes down to a problem of vocabulary. And the problem of vocabulary can express itself in multiple ways. One, you can simply not understand how to do something, because when you tried to learn it, the vocabulary wasn't clear, and so you didn't really understand what you were being told, what was being explained to you. There wasn't anywhere for that information to go in the first place, because those words were not inside of you. So for example, if you're trying to understand how to add fractions together, and the person is telling you get a common denominator, and then you add the numerators together, it's like you can't understand what they're saying. You can't actually do it because you don't understand what those words mean. They'd have to explain to you what those words mean, and then even if they do explain them to you, it might make sense in the moment. But if those words, for example, numerator and denominator, are not physically integrated into you, meaning that those neural circuits exist because those words are physically integrated as a set of neural circuitry, then that information isn't going to be stored anywhere. So it may make sense temporarily, but then you're not going to understand or remember it long term, which means you're not really going to fully understand and be able to apply it later. So that's when they say knowledge without application is useless, because you can understand something in a moment, can make sense, but then you can't apply it later, so you didn't really learn anything. Hi, William. So to go back to the point, you can have an issue of vocabulary, which is you don't have the words integrated, so you can't store that information to be recalled later, or you can have a simple problem of literacy or ability to read. Now, this is different. It stems from a vocabulary issue, but it's like a higher level of vocabulary issue, because with a simple vocabulary issue, you didn't learn something properly in the first place, and therefore you can't recall it or apply it later because you didn't really understand it. And so when a person's asking you a question, you may not even understand the question because you don't have those words effective within you. But in this particular student's case, he became fixated on the words. Now, going back to the problem I was describing, the question was, what's the total volume of the fruit inside the can? He became fixated on the words total volume. So the problem didn't make sense at all to him because, and then you might think, okay, the way I described it seems like a pretty simple problem. You have a can, it has a total volume, you have fruit and syrup inside of the can. The syrup takes a certain amount of volume and the fruit takes up a certain amount of volume. If you add the volume of the fruit and the syrup together, you get the total volume of the can. And it's pretty simple. If you want to find the volume of the fruit, you subtract the can's volume. You subtract the syrup's volume from the can's volume, you get the fruit. If you wanted to find the syrup and you knew the fruit's volume, you would subtract the fruit's volume from the volume of the can. If you wanted to find the can's volume, you would add the fruit's volume and the syrup's volume together. It's like there's only really 3 ways to look at it. So a simple issue became like a very difficult problem in this child's mind because they just couldn't understand. And I mean, think about it logically. If I told you, you have the volume of the can, you have the volume of the syrup, now find the total volume of the fruit. But in your mind, total volume means the volume of the can. Total volume. So it's not even a conscious process in the child's mind. Or this doesn't have to just be a child. It could be an adult. The person's mind, the problem is just not computing. It's not processing because their mind's trying to reconcile total volume with the fact that they've been given a bunch of other information. It just doesn't make sense, right? You see what I'm saying? Because total volume to them means of the can's volume would be what they're thinking as the total volume. So of course I had a process I went through to explain this to the child. And I first had to assess their vocabulary. Do all these words make sense? And we do that with TechnoTutor to figure out, okay, which of these words are not clear? Okay, all the words are clear. But then it's a higher level conceptual problem because it's not just a matter of those words in particular in that moment. It's a matter of the conceptual understanding that the child has built around the word total volume. And because when they learned it some years ago when I didn't even know them, obviously, the understanding of total volume became a point of association. So total volume in their mind means when you see a shape or a three-dimensional shape, total volume means the total volume. They can't imagine that a total volume could be a part of that volume. And there could be total volumes within total volume. So that you could have a total volume of just the fruit. The fruit itself has a total volume. The syrup has a total volume. And when you combine those together, you get the total volume of the can itself. It's like that is a higher order conceptual point. In itself is a higher vocabulary. There's an entire vocabulary concept around just what I described. And so what is on the surface a seemingly simple issue, you might think, and this was not an unintelligent child. I mean, this is a child who basically makes A's and B's in their schoolwork. Their father's a doctor, right? So you have this situation where it's like you can't reconcile why is this child who seems intelligent not able to understand this problem? Because if they understood all the words on the surface, it seems like they should understand it. But you have to go back into their education and look at when they were introduced the word total volume or that concept. Because now they formed an association. That has to be checked. See, of course, I'm able to see all of this because my ability to process information is at a very high level comparatively. So I can see what's going on and I can see what are the possible causes, and then I can get to the root of that and then support that person to see, firstly, what's the issue they're having, and then show them the solution. A lot of times, though, just showing them the solution isn't helpful because if I were to explain it in different terms, it's not a difficult problem. They could see that. But the problem is I'm now changing the vocabulary that the problem was written with. I'm taking out the word total volume and just simplifying it. So the other interesting point about this particular SAT problem and the SAT in general is that, okay, so when they were looking at, okay, so to solve the problem, you have to calculate the volume of the can itself. They gave you the height and they gave you the area of this circular base. All you have to do is multiply those two. And when you did that, you got 750. So I think it was that the height of the can was 10 and the area of the base was 75. So when you multiply those, you get 750. 3 of the answer choices, one of them was 7.5, one of the answer choices was 750, and one of the answer choices was 600 and... Let me think for a moment. No, it was 185, because they also told you that the volume of the syrup was 110. So in other words, if you multiplied the height of the cylinder and the area of its base, you would get 750. That was an answer choice. But of course, you haven't subtracted out the volume of the syrup to get the volume of the fruit. But they're deliberately putting 750 there because if your mind immediately multiplies them and you see the answer, you'll just choose that if you're not highly intelligent. A common mistake might just be randomly dividing the two numbers, or you might not even have any idea what you're doing, so you divide them, in which case you're going to get 7.5 if you divide the area of the base of that cylinder and the height. 75 divided by 10 is 7.5. So that was an answer choice. 185 came from adding the area of the base of the cylinder plus the volume of the syrup, so you get 185. 75 plus 110. That was also an answer choice. The correct answer, obviously, it was 750 minus 110, right? So 640, I suppose. So you'd have to actually find the volume first and then subtract out the volume of the fruit. So now, as I'm describing it, that may be difficult to follow. I don't know. The point isn't to try to teach you how to solve the problem. The point is for you to see that actually, though, it's not a challenging problem from the perspective that you're just finding a volume, a very simple volume, subtracting another volume, and then you have your answer. That's it. And yet, for this child, even though all of those steps would make sense individually and together, because they got fixated on the word total volume, that right there, like, it just threw a wrench in the whole process. So no matter how much I explained to them, when they kept seeing that, it's like their mind just kept getting confused. So why am I explaining all that? Because I want you to understand how easy it is to confuse someone who is seemingly intelligent just based on 1 or 2 words. Just where this child could do all the other parts of the problem that were required. There wasn't, in terms of their vocabulary, all the other points were relatively clear. But when it came to that point, it just like their mind got fixated on something that wasn't supportive. Getting fixated on that word, that phrase, total volume. And so you have, again, an otherwise reasonably intelligent child getting thrown off being able to solve a problem because of 2 words. Now extend this whole point in terms of your thinking to something like fake news or the media, or just generally being able to take information that you see in an article and form a conclusion. And how if you know what the average reading level is of the average person, how if you can write in such a way that you know psychologically what words will be confused with what concepts will be confused with what, how easy it would be to manipulate somebody. And the reason why I explained all the detail of that problem was to show you that where did they get their 3 wrong answer choices from? They weren't just random answer choices. They were taking bits of the information and combining them in incorrect ways that weren't actually solving the problem. So if you weren't 100% processing everything effectively, you would maybe see one of the numbers you got and be like, oh, that must be the answer. Especially if you were kind of confused, you might be like, well, I'm getting this number, maybe it's that because I don't really know how to solve it. And this is a problem of literacy. It's a problem of being able to read effectively. It's a vocabulary problem at the root of it, but it's a very complex vocabulary problem. At the end of the day, at a very basic foundational level, all reading ability is based on your physical integration of words. Beyond that, it's simply just a matter of having effective eye movement, which is based on training the muscles in your eyes to move consistently. But beyond that, that's really it. When it comes to reading information, it's basically having an effective vocabulary where the meanings of the words are clear and you have every possible meaning of a word stored within that word, If you think about it like a folder on a computer, imagine you have multiple files for that folder, where the folder is the particular word and each file is a different definition. So when the computer, which is like your unconscious, is processing the information and it opens up a folder, it has a lot of words it can look through, a lot of definitions it can file through and connect them into possibilities of connection with the other word that preceded it and so forth. And then it can deduce a probability of which one is most likely. And then from that, it makes the assumption of what's the right word to follow. Your brain works on fuzzy logic. It works on probabilities. It's a very effective computer when the files themselves are not corrupted and when there's enough files there. If the files aren't there, it won't compute. Or if the files are connected incorrectly to the wrong points, or if they're only connected to one thing and not all the other possibilities, then you're going to have a calculation error. Your mind is going to throw up an error, just like in computer programming, and then you're not going to be able to compute the information properly. You're not going to process the information. You're going to come to an incorrect conclusion. Or you're just going to be confused. And this is why literacy is such an important issue, because the world thinks that it's literate. But if you were to go, this will blow your mind. I'll have to do a video-like presentation on this sometime. If you were to go and look at the National Adult Literacy Survey done by the, I don't know, NEAS, I think it's called. I'm not quite sure actually what the organization, it's a government organization. But they did like an adult literacy survey to look at the functional literacy levels in America. And it's like ridiculous. It is ridiculous. People can't do basic things. Like if I told you, okay, you bought a sweater for $53, the sales tax was 6% on that, but you paid $53 for it. The sales tax was 6%. Can you, within the next 2 minutes, with a calculator, figure out what the original price of the sweater was? Can you do it like that? Can you say, okay, I'll just divide it by 1.06? That's it. That's all you got to do. That's all you got to do. Divided by 1.06, and you have the original price of the sweater. That's all you have to do. But most people couldn't do that. Most people would be like, okay, and you start thinking, and then if you're trying to do it under pressure, like in front of somebody, you'd start like getting nervous, and then like you might start going all over the place, and you'd probably maybe give up, or you'd like struggle through it, and then you wouldn't necessarily be certain about the answer. You'd be like, that's just like a really simple problem. It's so easy for the media and for the government or whoever you want to point as the point that's trying to basically confuse you. It's like when you were in school, did you ever try to bullshit your teacher with an excuse? Like, I couldn't get my paper turned in, and maybe if you could just give me an extension, I couldn't get it turned in because, you like try to give them some answer, and they're like, and you're just like hoping that they're just like, maybe your emotions or something, they'll just be like, okay, yeah. That's like what the media does on a daily basis. They are always trying to confuse everybody. And they know that the average reading ability of the average person is not very high. And as I showed you with that SAT example, that's not a hard problem. And I could go through tons of examples. The other one I just gave you with the example of the sweater being $53, and that's what you paid for it anyways. And then the tax being 6%, what's the original price of the sweater? That's also an SAT problem. And when you look at it, it's like they don't seem to me like anything on the SAT is difficult. And yet, very few people make very high scores. It just shows you that the average intelligence level, I mean, think about it. The average person has an IQ of 100. That means 50% of the people in the world, the average IQ level in the US, I think, is either 100 or 101, or it's like 98. I can't really exactly remember. It probably is changing all the time, obviously. You can look it up. Just go onto Google and type IQ by country. It's going to blow your mind. The average IQ in the US is like 100 or 101, something like that. That means, think about that. That means half the people in the country have an IQ below 100. And when you understand what an IQ of 100 means, it's like, shit. This world is in trouble. Our country is in trouble. When I say our country, I mean the United States. But I mean your country is in trouble. Everybody is in trouble. Because the only way to solve problems is to be able to read. The only way to solve problems is to be able to understand the problem. To be able to think about the problem. To be able to think about possible solutions. It's to be able to understand things that aren't even necessarily a part of the problem on first glance that may be required to solve the problem in some indirect sense. So, if you don't understand that your vocabulary is directly contributing to your IQ, like, you're screwed. If you don't understand that the way to increase your vocabulary, the way to increase your IQ is to increase your vocabulary, and that the only tool on this planet that can increase your vocabulary once you're past the age of 7 is TechnoTutor, and that if you don't increase your IQ, you're screwed. I mean, you really got to wake up. Because, like, unless you just want to, like, not worry about your future, not consider it, if you don't care anything about this world, you don't want to be a part of changing this world. Because changing this world, as I talked about yesterday in my video, is you have to change yourself. You have to change yourself. And the only way to change yourself is to change the words that are within you, and the memories, and the feelings, and the thoughts, which are all based on words. They're all just words, stored physically in your flesh. That's why Jesus said, I am the living word. He's not just talking about himself, he's talking about everybody. Human beings are living words. Literacy is a huge problem. And again, if you think literacy is not a problem, you don't understand what literacy really is. You don't understand the extent to which people are not literate. Because the problems I described, I bet most people watching this video would not have gotten it. Go take an SAT. If you're brave, go take an SAT and see what you get. Take an SAT, take it under the time limit, grade it, don't cheat, and see what you get. Have you gotten smarter since high school? Or have you gotten dumber? Most people got dumber. Not me. Not the people who use TechnoTutor. They're getting smarter every single day. So you really got to consider checking this out. And you really have to consider, the challenge within trying to fix a broken world when people can't read. To solve problems when people can't read. Look at what's going on with North Korea. North Korea has just agreed with South Korea to totally denuclearize that peninsula. Pushed. Communication. It's all psychological. All your problems, primarily, if you're watching this, are psychological. It's very few physical problems. There are physical problems in this world, but we can't sort those out until we sort out the psychological problems. And you can't sort those out until you increase your reading ability and your processing ability. Because otherwise, you're not even aware of what your own thoughts are and what conclusions you're coming to. It's all happening automatically at an unconscious level. So, unless you just don't care. But I think if you're watching this, you probably do. So it's time to get moving. Talk later. Bye.